The American Civil War stands as a defining chapter in the nation's story, a conflict that irrevocably shaped its future. While the grand strategies and famous battles are frequently examined, the individuals who wore the uniform can sometimes fade into the background. Today, we're focusing on the generals, the commanders who made fateful choices and led men through the fog of war. The title of general signifies the peak of military command, bringing with it not only power, but also tremendous burden. These were not mere distant strategists. Many stood with their troops in the heat of battle, personifying the resolve that characterized their leadership. While the Confederate cause is rightly condemned for its defense of slavery and secession, it is still necessary to acknowledge that its generals often demonstrated significant personal courage and martial talent. Their story, entangled with the injustice they fought to uphold, remains a complex study in military skill, command, and tenacity. First, be sure to like and subscribe to WinLink Deep Dive to support our investigative community. Before we begin our official ranking, let's start with an honorable mention for John Bell Hood. When the war began, Hood enlisted with the Confederacy and advanced rapidly, his reputation built on aggressive and daring maneuvers. Known for his fierce combativeness, he was elevated to the rank of temporary full general on July 18, 1864, and placed in charge of the Army of Tennessee for the Atlanta campaign. At just 33 years old, he was the youngest commander of an army in the entire war. Historian Bruce Catton contended that swapping General Joseph E. Johnston for John Bell Hood was among the war's most critical errors, stating, "The decision to replace Johnston with Hood was probably the single largest mistake that either government made during the war, period." Hood's relentless offensive style resulted in a string of devastating losses, such as the failed defense of Atlanta and the catastrophic Franklin-Nashville campaign, which crippled the Army of Tennessee. His command choices accelerated the breakdown of Confederate efforts in the Western Theater, speeding the South's final defeat. Though his aggressiveness initially marked him as a rising star, his time leading the Army of Tennessee serves as a warning about boldness pushed to a dangerous extreme. Hood is an honorable mention here because his promotion to full general was never officially confirmed by the Confederate Senate, and he returned to the rank of lieutenant general on January 23, 1865. Now let's move on to our ranked list. Kicking off the count at number 7, who I believe is the worst Confederate general, is Samuel Cooper. Born in 1798, Samuel Cooper was a graduate of West Point. In March of 1861, he left the U.S. Army and shortly after received a commission in the Confederate forces, becoming the Adjutant and Inspector General, the highest-ranking officer in the entire Confederate Army. Even though he held the rank of general, Cooper never once led an army in the field, nor did he see direct combat. His administrative abilities were crucial for the Confederacy's operations, yet history largely recalls him as an administrative official instead of a battlefield leader, and for that reason he lands in the last spot on this list. Arriving at number 6 is Braxton Bragg. By the time the Civil War started, Bragg had already built a solid military career. When the conflict erupted, Bragg sided with the Confederacy. His initial achievements in organizing and drilling troops in Pensacola, Florida, earned him promotions to Major General and later to Full General in 1862. Despite his grasp of strategy, Bragg's command was marred by constant disputes with his own officers and an inability to capitalize on his battlefield wins. Although Bragg was a significant figure in the Confederate war machine, his legacy is mostly colored by his troubled relations with fellow officers and his lack of decisive, long-term success. One private, Sam Watkins, who later became a published author, wrote in his memoirs a depiction of Bragg that mirrors the discontent felt by many of his soldiers. His leadership approach was frequently viewed as severe and dictatorial, which fueled the tensions he had with officers and enlisted men alike. If it weren't for Samuel Cooper's complete absence from combat, Bragg would undoubtedly be in the last position. Beginning the top 5 is P.G.T. Beauregard. Born in 1818 in Louisiana, Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard graduated from West Point in 1838. By the start of the Civil War, Beauregard had a well-established military record and was promptly named the first Brigadier General of the Confederate Army. He became the Confederacy's first celebrated commander by leading the successful attack on Fort Sumter in April 1861, the first engagement of the war. His early triumphs persisted at the First Battle of Bull Run, where his troops, combined with those of General Joseph E. Johnston, achieved a vital Confederate win. After these initial victories, Beauregard was moved to the Western Theater, where he was instrumental in the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. However, his command faced scrutiny when he did not exploit an early opportunity, resulting in a Confederate loss. Beauregard's early war leadership helped build Confederate morale, but his subsequent challenges and clashes with higher-ups reduced his standing. His uneven performance in battle and political troubles kept him from reaching a higher echelon among Confederate military leaders. Securing the number 4 position is Joseph E. Johnston. By the outbreak of the Civil War, Johnston had achieved the rank of Quartermaster General in the U.S. Army, but resigned to ally with the Confederacy in 1861. Johnston was among the most senior officers to defect to the South and was instrumental in the Confederate win at the First Battle of Bull Run. However, his defensive-minded tactics and repeated disagreements with President Jefferson Davis hampered his effectiveness as a commander. After being injured in the Peninsula Campaign in 1862, Johnston was succeeded by Robert E. Lee. Later in the conflict, Johnston was assigned to lead the Army of Tennessee, where his defensive strategies delayed Union progress but did not produce conclusive wins. His hesitancy to commit to full-scale battles led to his dismissal in the 1864 Atlanta campaign. However, Johnston was returned to command in early 1865 to lead Confederate troops in the Carolinas. But by that time, the war was almost over. He finally surrendered to William T. Sherman in April 1865, several weeks after Lee's surrender at Appomattox. Claiming the number 3 spot is Edmund Kirby Smith. Born in 1824, Smith emerged as a key figure in the Confederate Army, where he was tasked with leading the Trans-Mississippi Department, a vital but remote part of the Confederacy. Even though he was cut off from the primary war theaters, Smith was crucial in driving back Union incursions. While Smith never commanded a principal Confederate army like Robert E. Lee or Joseph E. Johnston, his leadership allowed the Confederacy to maintain a foothold in the West longer than expected. Smith was among the final Confederate generals to surrender, yielding to Union forces in May 1865, a full 8 weeks after the collapse of Robert E. Lee's army. Holding down the second spot is Albert Sidney Johnston. By the time the Civil War began, Johnston was one of the most esteemed officers in the South, known for his discipline, strategic acumen, and leadership in multiple military campaigns. He was named commander of Confederate forces in the Western Department, which covered the Western Theater and key zones along the Mississippi River. He later assumed command of the Army of the Mississippi and guided Confederate troops to early victories. Tragically, Johnston was mortally wounded at the Battle of Shiloh, a severe blow to the Confederate war effort. His death cost the Confederacy one of its most revered leaders at a pivotal juncture in the war. But his command style had displayed potential, and his loss created a significant gap in the Confederate leadership. And the number 1 ranked Confederate general is, as you likely predicted, Robert E. Lee. When Virginia seceded from the Union in 1861, Lee was confronted with a monumental choice. Despite being offered command of the Union Army, Lee decided to resign from the U.S. Army and join the Confederacy, a choice that would shape the rest of his life. Lee was made commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, where he soon became the South's most accomplished general. His triumphs at Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, and Second Bull Run are the stuff of legend. However, Lee's loss at the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 was a major tipping point in the conflict. The defeat halted his invasion of the North and damaged Confederate spirit. Lee is universally considered one of the finest military tacticians in American history. Even though the Confederacy was defeated in the end, Lee's legacy persists as a reminder of the intricate nature of war and command, and he continues to be one of the most analyzed and respected personalities in military history. All right, there you have it. The 7 Confederate generals of the Civil War, ranked from our worst to our first, based on their impact on the Southern cause and their wartime record. Do you agree with this ranking, or do you see it differently? Whatever your take, I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below. If you found this exploration interesting, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a fellow history fan. Thanks for watching.